Captain Amanda Reeves traced her fingers along the worn leather armrest of her command chair, feeling each crack and imperfection. The Perseus might be considered obsolete by Confederation standards, but the ship had character, something those gleaming automated vessels could never understand. Proximity alert in Sector 7. The ship's computer announced, its voice carrying none of the artificial warmth newer models boasted. Reeves preferred it that way. She'd rather have honest machinery than something pretending to be human. "Talk to me, Harrison. What are we looking at?" She straightened in her chair, eyes fixed on the main view screen, where Lieutenant James Harrison worked his sensor station with practiced efficiency. "Something's out there, Captain." Harrison's fingers danced across his console, the old-style physical buttons clicking reassuringly. "But our sensors can't get a solid read. It's like they're seeing through water." Engineering Chief Mike Sullivan's voice crackled through the comm system. "Captain, the power fluctuations are getting worse. Whatever's out there is playing havoc with our electromagnetic shielding." Reeves nodded, though Sullivan couldn't see her. "Options. We could try rotating shield frequencies like the Confederation recommended." But Sullivan paused, and she could practically hear him scratching his beard in thought. "Honestly, I'd rather trust our old deflector arrays. They might eat more power, but at least we understand how they work." "Do it," Reeves ordered. The Perseus might be scheduled for decommissioning next month, but she'd be damned if she'd let some unknown threat take them down today. "Harrison, get me a visual." "Lieutenant Martinez, bring us about to heading 340. Let's see what we're dealing with." The stars wheeled on the view screen as the ship turned. For a moment, everything was silent except for the familiar hum of the Perseus's engines, a sound that had lulled Reeves to sleep countless nights during her 15 years in space. "Contact." Harrison's voice cut through the quiet. "3 vessels, configuration unknown. They're not matching anything in our database." The ships materialized like ink drops in water, their hulls seeming to absorb the starlight rather than reflect it. They moved with an unsettling grace, their formation perfect, too perfect for organic pilots. "They're charging weapons," Martins reported from Tactical, her voice steady despite the tension. "Energy signatures are..." "Captain, I've never seen readings like these." Reeves keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. Sullivan, give me everything you can to the forward shields." The first shot came without warning. No ultimatum, no demands. A beam of sickly green energy lanced out from the lead vessel, striking the Perseus's port side. The impact threw Reeves against her restraints as warning klaxons blared throughout the ship. "Direct hit," Martinez called out. "Port shield generators are offline. Hull integrity at 70% and falling." "Return fire," Reeves ordered. "All batteries, target the lead vessel." The Perseus's weapon systems might be considered outdated, but they still packed a punch. Phased plasma torpedoes streaked across space, followed by concentrated railgun fire, weapons that had been largely abandoned by the Confederation in favor of more elegant solutions. Their attackers dodged with impossible precision, but one torpedo found its mark. The explosion briefly illuminated the attacking vessel's true form, a nightmare of angles that seemed to defy physics. "Got the bastards," Martins whispered, but her victory was short-lived. The second attack came from all 3 ships simultaneously. Energy beams converged on the Perseus's engineering section, burning through the remaining shields like they were tissue paper. The ship bucked violently, throwing crew members from their stations. Multiple hull breaches. Harrison shouted over the sound of buckling metal. "Emergency containment fields are holding, but we've lost primary power to decks 4 through 7. Reeves grabbed her console as another impact rocked the ship. "Sullivan, talk to me. Main reactors going critical." His voice was barely audible through the static. "I can contain it, but we'll be running on auxiliaries. Captain, we need 2. The transmission cut off as another hit shook the Perseus to her core. Through the view screen, Reeves watched as their attackers pulled back, apparently satisfied with the damage they'd inflicted. "They're leaving," Martins reported, disbelief evident in her voice. "Just leaving us here." Reeves stared at the retreating shadows, understanding dawning with cold clarity. They weren't worth finishing off. Just another obsolete vessel left to die in the void. "Like hell," she muttered, rising from her chair despite the pain in her ribs. "Status report, all stations. We're not done yet." Admiral Elizabeth Stone watched the holographic display with clenched fists as the Perseus's distress signal played for the 5th time. The Galactic Confederation's High Council chamber, with its soaring crystalline arches and floating platforms, felt more like a theater than a place of governance. Appropriate, given the performance she was about to witness. "The evidence is clear," Counselor Vex announced, his elongated fingers gesturing through the replay of the attack. The Selenian's translucent skin pulsed with patterns of disapproval. The vessel was operating well beyond its certified operational range. One might question why humans insist on maintaining such antiquated equipment. "That antiquated equipment carries 83 souls," Stone countered, her voice steady despite her anger. The Perseus was on a sanctioned patrol route, responding to reports of unauthorized activity in the sector. High Counselor Nastol's primary eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of dismissal among the Quinterie. "Reports your own science ministry failed to verify." The ship was scheduled for decommissioning within the standard lunar cycle. Resources would be wasted on a rescue attempt. Stone stepped forward, her diplomatic uniform catching the light from the chamber's bioluminescent panels. "The Perseus is still transmitting. Captain Reeves and her crew are alive. We have a duty." "Your emotional attachment to obsolete technology is noted, Admiral," Vex interrupted, his skin now rippling with amusement. "But the Confederation must prioritize. The Orion border requires state-of-the-art vessels for proper defense. The Perseus, unfortunate situation, simply accelerates an inevitable outcome." From his crystalline platform, Ambassador Corell of the Arxian Empire rose. Light refracted through his angular form, casting rainbow patterns across the chamber floor. "I served alongside humans during the Nexus crisis." His harmonic voice resonated through the chamber. "Their obsolete methods saved my entire battle group. We would dishonor ourselves by abandoning them now." "The Arxian Empire's position is noted," Nastol responded with diplomatic precision. "However, the deployment of rescue assets to contested space requires a full council vote. The risk assessment protocols are quite clear." Stone activated her datapad, projecting new figures into the holographic display. The Perseus's last transmission indicated functional life support and emergency power. They have supplies for at least 3 standard weeks. A rescue mission would take a minimum of 5 weeks to organize and execute, given current patrol patterns. Vex cut in. "The math, Admiral Stone, does not support your position. The crew's survival chances are below acceptable parameters for resource allocation." "They're not numbers," Stone snapped, her composure finally cracking. "They're people. People who put their lives on the line protecting Confederation space while you debate acceptable parameters." The chamber fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the environmental systems seemed muted. High Counselor Nastol rose to his full height, all 4 arms clasped in formal disapproval. "Admiral Stone, your species' tendency toward emotional outbursts remains problematic. The Perseus's situation, while unfortunate, provides an opportunity to accelerate the modernization of your fleet. The Confederation stands ready to provide replacement vessels meeting our current standards." "Replacement vessels?" Corell's crystalline form vibrated with barely contained fury. "You offer them new ships while their people drift in space. This is not efficiency, Counselor. This is cowardice masked as protocol." "The vote will proceed as scheduled," Nastol declared, ignoring Corell's outburst. "Until then, all Confederation vessels are advised to maintain their current patrol routes. We cannot risk further assets on an uncertain rescue operation." Stone stared at the holographic image of the Perseus, still floating in the display. The ship's damage was extensive, but she knew Amanda Reeves. The captain had started as her tactical officer 15 years ago. If anyone could keep a crew alive in impossible circumstances, it was her. This session of the High Council is adjourned, Naztul announced. We will reconvene in 3 standard days for the formal vote. As the other councillors filed out, Corell approached Stone. His crystalline body hummed at a frequency only she could hear, an old battle sign of solidarity from their days fighting together. They underestimate your people, Admiral, he said softly. As they always have. Stone nodded, her eyes still fixed on the Perseus's image. They're about to learn why that's a mistake. Chief Engineer Mike Sullivan's hands shook as he soldered the last connection in place. The access tunnel around him groaned like a dying animal, the Perseus's hull protesting against forces it was never designed to endure. His palms were covered in electrical burns, and his lungs ached from the acrid smoke that even the emergency ventilation couldn't fully clear. Sullivan, talk to me. Lieutenant Jessica Martinez's voice crackled through his headset. The radiation levels in Section 4 are still climbing. He wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of grease. Yeah, that's actually good news. Means my theory was right. He checked the jerry-rigged sensor array he'd assembled from spare parts. Those bastards didn't just hit us with energy weapons. They left something behind. The crawlway suddenly felt tighter as another hull plate shifted. Sullivan ignored the warning creaks and focused on the readings. The exotic particles from the attack were behaving unlike anything he'd seen before. They seemed to dance between states of matter, following patterns that defied conventional physics. I'm sending you the data now, he said, tapping commands into his tablet. Tell me I'm not crazy. There was a long pause as Martinez analyzed the readings. Sullivan used the time to reinforce his makeshift connections, using materials that would make any Confederation engineer faint, including pieces of his own belt buckle. Holy hell, Martinez finally breathed. These particles, they're not just radiation. They're trying to establish a resonance pattern with our hull material. Sullivan grinned despite the pain in his burned hands. Exactly. Those high-tech weapons were designed for modern Confederation ships, all those fancy alloys and quantum-aligned materials. But our old girl, she's got good old-fashioned layered steel and titanium composite. The particles can't figure out what to do with it. So instead of destroying our hull, they're getting trapped between the layers, Sullivan finished, like light bouncing between mirrors. And each time they collide, he checked another reading. They're releasing energy, usable energy. A new voice joined their channel. Captain Reeves, tell me you're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Chief. Sullivan crawled through a particularly tight section of the tunnel, following the trail of exotic energy. Captain, we've got 5 days of emergency power left. Maybe 6 if we shut down everything but life support. But these particles, they're putting out enough energy to power the whole ship, if we can harvest it. The risk, Martinez started, is better than certain death, Sullivan interrupted. Look, I know it's crazy. These particles are probably supposed to tear ships apart at the atomic level. But they're not doing that to us. They're trapped, like lightning in a bottle. We just need to build a bigger bottle. There was a moment of silence broken only by the creaking of the hull. Sullivan could almost hear the captain weighing their options. What few they had. What do you need? Reeves finally asked. Sullivan reached the main junction and began removing panels. Martinez, I need you to reconfigure the power distribution grid. We're going to turn the entire hull into one big energy collector. Johnson, if you're hearing this, I need every spare radiation shield we've got, even the personal ones. The hull's integrity is already compromised, Martinez warned. If we start running power through it, then we better get it right the first time. Sullivan finished. He pulled up the ship's schematics on his tablet, marking critical points. We'll start with the least damaged sections. If it works there, we can expand to. A violent shudder ran through the ship, cutting him off. Warning klaxons blared as emergency lights flickered. Primary life support just failed, Martines reported, her voice tight. Backup systems are engaged, but they're drawing more power than they should. Time to roll the dice, Sullivan muttered. He began rerouting power through his modified collectors. The particles responded immediately, their energy output spiking on his sensors. Martinez, I'm sending you power now. It's going to be rough. Nothing like the clean energy you're used to. Like my grandmother used to say, Martines replied, ugly power is better than no power. Sullivan watched as the energy readings climbed, praying that his calculations were correct. If he was wrong, they'd be doing the Confederation's work for them, tearing the Perseus apart from the inside out. All right, you glowing bastards, he whispered to the particles swimming through his ship's hull. Let's dance. The emergency lighting cast long shadows across the Perseus's bridge as Captain Reeves studied the holographic display of their damaged hull. Sullivan's makeshift power system had been running for 6 hours, and instead of blowing them all to atoms, it was actually working. The exotic particles trapped in their hull were providing more power than their standard reactors ever had. Ma'am, Security Chief Tyler Brooks called from his station. I think you need to see this. His fingers moved across his console, bringing up a series of old sensor logs. I've been reviewing our scan data from just before the attack, but using our backup sensors instead of the Confederation upgrades. Reeves moved to his station, noting how the ancient display screen somehow seemed clearer than the modern holographic interfaces. What am I looking at, Chief? These readings here. Brooks pointed to a series of oscillating patterns. Our primary sensors didn't flag them because they didn't match any known signatures. But the old quantum resonance scanners. He tapped a few commands, and the pattern shifted, revealing a familiar shape hidden in the noise. That's a ship wake, Reeves breathed. But how did our old sensors pick it up when the new ones couldn't? Lieutenant Martinez looked up from her engineering station. Because we're running them through copper circuits instead of quantum channels. The old sensors are slower, but they're not trying to be clever. They just report what they see, even if it doesn't make sense. Speaking of not making sense, Sullivan's voice crackled through the comm. I think I've figured out why we're still alive. The chief engineer's face appeared on a secondary screen, streaked with grease and sporting a wide grin. Remember all those complaints about our wasteful hull design? Reeves nodded. The Perseus's triple-layered hull had been a constant source of ridicule from Confederation engineers, who preferred their sleek, single-layer quantum-aligned plating. The extra mass and maintenance requirements were considered proof of human engineering's primitive nature. Well, Sullivan continued, each layer of our hull is slightly out of phase with the others. It's a design quirk from when these ships were built. They couldn't get the alignment perfect, so they compensated with multiple layers. Those exotic particles. They're bouncing between the layers like light in a fiber optic cable, but the phase difference is keeping them from synchronizing and tearing us apart. A failure that became an advantage, Martines mused. The Confederation would hate that. Brooks suddenly straightened in his chair. Captain, I'm getting something else on the old sensors. It's ma'am. I think we're being washed. He transferred his display to the main screen. The image was grainy by modern standards, but unmistakable. A distortion in space, roughly vessel-shaped, hovering just at the edge of their sensor range. They never left, Reeves realized. They're studying us, studying how their weapons affect an obsolete ship. That's not all they're doing, Brooks added, his voice grim. I've been analyzing their attack pattern. They didn't choose us randomly. They knew exactly where to hit us, exactly how much damage to do. They wanted us crippled but not destroyed. Martinez swore softly. We're not victims. We're test subjects. Reeves stared at the shadowy outline of their observer, pieces falling into place. The Confederation's been upgrading their entire fleet to standardized designs. Every ship using the same technology, the same defensive systems. And our attackers have found a way to bypass those systems, Sullivan finished. They're probably recording everything, seeing how their weapons interact with different materials. And our old-fashioned hull is showing them something they didn't expect, Reeves said. She turned to Martinez. How many ships in the Confederation fleet still use layered hull designs? None, Martinez answered. The Perseus was the last. That's why they wanted her decommissioned so badly. Brooks's console beeped again. Captain, the distortion is moving. I think. Yes, they're adjusting position. Trying to get a better scan of our power signature. Reeves felt a cold smile spread across her face. They're concerned. We're not behaving like a dying ship anymore. And they want to know why. She straightened her uniform. Well, let's give them something else to think about. Sullivan, how much power can you give us? More than we've ever had, the engineer replied. But the system's still unstable. If we push it too hard, we're already dead by Confederation standards. Reeves interrupted. Time to show our observers why they should have finished the job when they had the chance. Power surge in 3, 2, 1. Lieutenant Martinez counted down as she initiated another burst from their makeshift energy system. The Perseus's hull hummed with exotic particles, sending ripples of blue-green light dancing across the bridge displays. Security Chief Brooks hunched over his sensor station, watching as the energy pulse illuminated the space around them like sonar in deep water. Got you, he whispered, marking another coordinate on his tactical display. Captain, I've confirmed their patrol pattern. They're orbiting us in an elliptical course, staying just within range of their scanning equipment. Captain Reeves studied the plot points Brooks had mapped. How many ships? Just one now, he replied, adjusting the gain on the old quantum resonance sensors. The other two left about 6 hours ago, probably returning to their base with the initial test data. Sullivan's voice crackled through the comm system, accompanied by the sound of tools against metal. Whatever they're scanning for, they're being thorough about it. These energy spikes in our hull match known weapons research patterns. Someone's building a nasty surprise for the Confederation. And we're their guinea pigs, Martinez added bitterly. She wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of engine grease. The environmental systems were still struggling, making the bridge feel like a sauna. But why us? Why not grab a derelict ship for their tests? Reeves leaned back in her command chair, feeling the worn leather against her spine. The answer had been nagging at her since they discovered their observer. Because we're perfect, she said slowly. An aging ship with an experienced crew, running old technology alongside new. We're a controlled experiment. Mom. Brooks looked up from his station, confusion clear on his face. Think about it, Reeves continued. They hit us precisely enough to cripple without destroying. They're watching how we adapt, how their weapons interact with different generations of technology. The Perseus is a floating laboratory. Martinez's eyes widened. And when the Confederation abandoned us, they gave our attackers all the time they need to study the results. A new alarm chirped from Brooks's console. He quickly adjusted his screens, then swore under his breath. Captain, the observers changed course. They're moving closer. Show me, Reeves ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the grainy sensor image of their stalker. The vessel's cloaking technology made it look like a heat mirage in space, but the old sensors could track its mass displacement. It was larger than they'd initially thought, easily twice the Perseus's size. They're scanning us with something new, Brooks reported. Different frequency than before. More powerful. They must have noticed our power system coming online. Sullivan's voice cut in urgently. Captain, these readings, they're not just scanning us anymore. They're trying to excite the particles in our hull. If they push hard enough, they could detonate them. Martinez finished, her hands flying across her engineering console. Turn our own power source into a bomb. Reeves felt the deck vibrate beneath her feet as the hostile scan intensified. Options. We could shut down the particle collection system, Sullivan suggested. Go back to emergency power. And suffocate when life support fails, Martinez countered. We need those particles. Brooks straightened suddenly in his chair. Maybe we can use them for something else. His fingers danced across his console as he pulled up old combat files. During the border wars, Earth ships used to modulate their shield harmonics to reflect enemy scans back at them. If we could do that with these particles, we'd give them a face full of their own scanning beam, Sullivan finished. But the timing would have to be perfect. Too early, they'll see it coming. Too late. How long until their scan reaches critical levels? Reeves asked. Martinez checked her readings. 4 minutes, maybe 5. After that, the particle reaction will be self-sustaining. We won't be able to stop it. Reeves stood, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders. Their hunters had finally made a mistake. They'd gotten curious. Now it was time to make them regret it. Sullivan, Martinez, start the modifications. Brooks, I want everything our old sensors can tell us about that ship's vulnerabilities. She smiled grimly. Let's show them why humans still train their crews to think on their feet. Operations Officer Rachel Thompson's makeshift war room was actually Storage Bay 3, its walls now covered with hand-drawn schematics and mathematical formulas. She stood before her assembled team, trying not to think about how the hostile scan was making her teeth vibrate. The plan is insane, she said, tapping her stylus against a diagram of the Perseus's electromagnetic defense grid. But given that we're already using exotic particles as a battery, insane might be our best option. 3 minutes until their scan reaches critical levels. Martins reported from her temporary station. She'd relocated here to work directly with Thompson's team, leaving the bridge stations on automatic. Sullivan wiped his burned hands on his uniform pants, studying the calculations. The principle is sound. Our electromagnetic defense grid was designed to deflect incoming energy weapons. If we modify it to resonate with the particles in our hull, we can turn the whole ship into one big reflector dish. Thompson finished. But we'll only get one shot. The power surge will probably fry every circuit in the grid. Captain Reeves stood at the back of the room, watching her crew work. What about the particle containment? If we lose power to those systems? Actually, that's the beautiful part, Sullivan said, his eyes bright with engineering fever. The surge will use up most of the particles in one burst, like lighting a pool of fuel. One big flash, then nothing left to explode. Brooks spoke up from his monitoring station. The observer's changing position again. They're moving to get a better angle on our starboard section. They still think we're helpless, Thompson said. Just lying here, waiting to be dissected. She made a final adjustment to her calculations. The trick will be timing the pulse exactly when their scan hits maximum power. Too early, and we won't have enough energy to penetrate their shields. Too late. We're atomic dust. Martinez finished grimly. No pressure. Reeves stepped forward, examining the hastily assembled control panel Thompson had built. It looked like something from an ancient science fiction movie. All physical switches and exposed wiring. Talk me through it. What do you need? Engineering has to route all power through the defense grid simultaneously, Thompson explained. We're talking every joule we can squeeze from those particles. Meanwhile, tactical needs to calculate the exact reflection angle to hit their weakest shield sector. Their shields are weakest at their scan emission point, Brooks added. Basic physics. You can't project a focused beam through a full-strength shield. 2 minutes, Martins warned. The deck plates were vibrating now, resonating with the hostile scan. Sullivan headed for the door. I'll get to engineering. When I give the signal, throw the switches in sequence, just like we practiced. Wait, Reeves called after him. What happens to our systems after the pulse? Assuming this works. The chief engineer paused. Best case, we keep basic life support and maybe maneuvering thrusters. Worst case, he shrugged, we'll be as dead in space as they think we are now. But at least we'll take them with us. 1 minute 30 seconds, Martins announced. Warning lights began flashing throughout the bay as the particle energy levels approached critical mass. Reeves took her position at the master control panel. Thompson, Martinez, start the power rerouting. Brooks, get me a targeting solution. Everyone else, brace for impact. This is going to get rough. Thompson's hands flew across her console, initiating the defense grid modifications. The ship's lights dimmed as power was diverted, then flared bright as the particles responded. On her screens, energy readings climbed past safety limits and kept going. 1 minute, Martinez called out. Hull temperature rising. The particles are getting unstable. Targeting solution locked, Brooks reported. Their scan beam will reach optimal reflection angle in 53 seconds. Sullivan's voice crackled through the comm. Engineering ready. All safeties disengage. Captain, it's been an honor. Reeves gripped the control panel, feeling the ship's vibrations through her palms. The Perseus had been scheduled for decommissioning, written off as obsolete. But in these final moments, she was about to remind the galaxy why humans never threw anything away without a good reason. All hands, she broadcast shipwide. Prepare for emergency pulse on my mark. And remember, whatever happens next, we just rewrote the book on obsolete technology. 30 seconds to critical. Martinez called out, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Warning klaxons blared as the Perseus's hull groaned under the increasing pressure of the hostile scan. Thompson's fingers danced across her jury-rigged control panel, making final adjustments to the electromagnetic grid. Sparks flew from overloaded circuits, but the old systems held together, testament to their robust design. Engineering reports all power conduits aligned. Brooks announced from his station. Hull particles at maximum excitation. If we're going to do this. 20 seconds. Martinez interrupted. The deck plates were vibrating so hard now that loose tools skittered across the floor. Their scan is intensifying. They must know something's wrong. Captain Reeves stood at the master control station, her hands hovering over the final activation switches. Status of the observer. Still holding position, Brooks reported. Their shields are at maximum, but they're maintaining the scan. They think we're helpless. 15 seconds. Sullivan's voice crackled through the comm, almost lost in the static of electromagnetic interference. Captain, the particle containment fields are starting to buckle. We need to trigger the pulse now. Not yet, Reeves commanded, watching the energy readings climb. We need their scan at full power. Thompson, ready on your mark. Thompson's makeshift control board was smoking slightly, but her calculation showed green across the board. The defense grid is primed. Every plate, every conductor in the hull is ready to channel the pulse. 10 seconds. The bridge lighting flickered and died, leaving them in the red glow of emergency systems. On the main viewer, they could see the observer's outline more clearly now, their scan beam visible as a distortion in space. 8 seconds. All hands, Reeves broadcast shipwide. Brace for electromagnetic pulse. This is going to hit us as hard as them. 6 seconds. Brooks's sensors shrieked with new warnings. They're powering weapons. They've figured it out. 5. Hold position, Reeves ordered, her knuckles white on the control panel. 4. The hull temperature reached critical levels. Warning messages cascaded across every screen as safety systems tried desperately to shut down the overloading grid. 3. Enemy weapons locked. Brooks shouted over the din of alarms. 2. Now, Captain. Sullivan's voice was desperate. We can't hold it any longer. 1. All hands, Reeves commanded, return fire. She threw the switches in sequence. The Perseus erupted with energy as every particle trapped in her hull released its power simultaneously. The electromagnetic defense grid, modified far beyond its original specifications, caught the energy and focused it like a lens. The hostile scan beam, still at maximum power, provided the perfect channel. The pulse traveled back along its path, amplified by the particle's exotic properties. It struck the observer's shields at their weakest point, exactly where the scan beam emerged. The effect was catastrophic. The observers' shields collapsed instantly. The pulse continued through their hull, overwhelming their power systems in a cascade of overloads. Secondary explosions bloomed across their vessel as energy systems failed. But the Perseus paid a price for victory. Every circuit in the defense grid burned out simultaneously. Power conduits exploded throughout the ship. The lights died, then even the emergency systems went dark. For a moment, both ships hung in space, dark and silent. Then, slowly, the Perseus's backup systems began to come online. Ancient chemical batteries, considered too primitive to be worth replacing, provided just enough power for basic life support and minimal maneuvering capability. Damage report, Reeves called out, pulling herself up from where the final pulse had thrown her. Main power is gone, Martins reported, checking systems through backup displays. But the particle reaction has stabilized. We're not going to explode, at least. The observer, Reeves asked. Brooks squinted at his functioning sensors, old analog systems that had survived the pulse. Completely disabled. Their main reactor is offline, and I'm detecting multiple hull breaches. They're dead in space, Captain. He paused, then added with satisfaction. More dead than we are. Life signs. Strong readings throughout their ship. Their crew survived, but they won't be going anywhere without help. Reeves smiled grimly. Thompson, do we have enough power for communications? Yes, Mom. The old radio backup is still working. Not fancy enough to be affected by the pulse. Good. Reeves straightened her uniform. Let's send a message to our friends over there. I think it's time we discuss their weapons research program, and why they shouldn't have tested it on a ship that remembers how to bite back. 3 weeks later, the Perseus emerged from the Orion border under her own power. Her hull bore the scars of battle and emergency repairs, but she moved with purpose, pride evident in every working system. Behind her, under heavy guard, limped the captured prototype vessel, its advanced systems still struggling to recover from the Perseus's improvised counterattack. On the Confederation's main docking station, Admiral Elizabeth Stone stood beside Ambassador Carell, watching the approaching ships through the observation dome. Around them, a crowd of alien diplomats and engineers had gathered, drawn by rumors of the Perseus's impossible survival. They said it couldn't be done. Carell's crystalline form vibrated with satisfaction. An obsolete vessel, they called it. Unsuitable for modern space. Stone smiled as the Perseus executed a perfect docking maneuver, her old maneuvering thrusters showing precision that put newer ships to shame. They forgot the most important part of any vessel isn't its technology, it's its crew. The docking bay's atmosphere shimmered as Captain Reeves and her senior staff stepped through the airlock. They wore their damaged uniforms with pride, each burn mark and tear telling the story of their survival. Behind them, under guard, came the captured vessel's command crew, beings of shifting shadow and light who had underestimated their chosen prey. High Counselor Naztol stepped forward, all 4 arms clasped in formal greeting. Captain Reeves, the Confederation owes you and your crew a debt of gratitude. The intelligence you've recovered about this rogue faction's weapons program is invaluable. Recovered? Sullivan muttered under his breath, more like pride from their smoking wreck. Reeves shot him a warning glance, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. The Perseus was simply doing her duty, Counselor. Though I believe there's a lesson here about writing off equipment, or people, too quickly. Indeed. Vex moved through the crowd, his translucent skin now pulsing with patterns of respect, rather than dismissal. Our preliminary analysis of your encounter is enlightening. The attackers' weapons were specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in our standardized defense systems. Had they succeeded in their tests, they would have had a blueprint for defeating every modern ship in your fleet. Thompson finished. Good thing they ran into something a little less modern. Martinez stepped forward, holding up a data crystal. We've prepared a full technical report on how we modified our systems to counter their attack. Fair warning. It involves a lot of obsolete technology working in ways it probably shouldn't. The Confederation's chief engineer, a being of pure energy contained within an environmental suit, reached for the crystal with evident eagerness. Your crew's innovations with the electromagnetic defense grid alone will revolutionize our approach to shield harmonics. And your use of the exotic particles is already being studied for potential applications, Stone interrupted smoothly. Which brings us to the matter of the Perseus's decommissioning order. Nastol raised his primary hands in a gesture of withdrawal. Already suspended, Admiral. In fact, the High Council has approved a new initiative. Project Phoenix, we're calling it. A program to incorporate older, proven technologies alongside our most advanced systems. And who better to lead this project, Corell added, than the crew who demonstrated its value so dramatically. Reeves looked at her people, Sullivan with his burned hands and proud grin, Martinez's exhausted but triumphant stance, Thompson's quiet confidence, and Brooks's watchful satisfaction. They had done the impossible, not because of advanced technology, but because they understood their ship's true strength. "We be honored," she said, "though the Perseus will need extensive repairs first." "Already arranged," Stone assured her. "Though I understand your chief engineer has some unique modifications he'd like to maintain." Sullivan straightened. "The particle collection system stays. We've got it stable now, and it provides more power than anything modern. Plus," he grinned at the captured enemy commander, "it's always good to keep something in reserve that nobody expects." As the gathering broke into smaller groups with engineers and tacticians eagerly questioning the Perseus's crew, Reeves found herself standing beside the old ship's observation window. The Perseus's scarred hull gleamed in the station's lights, each mark telling a story of survival against impossible odds. "Not bad for an obsolete vessel," she murmured, touching the cool glass. The ship that had been written off too soon had not only survived, she had changed the future of space travel. Sometimes, she reflected, the oldest stars burned the brightest.